20 tons of coconut shells to a 19-year-old boy. He'll quit before the rainy season. That was the bet the forklift driver made out loud. Right there on the loading dock. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Loud enough for Malik Reeves to hear too. Nobody expected him to answer. He didn't. He just signed the delivery slip, climbed onto the flatbed truck, and rode with the shells all the way back to Driftwood Bend. The trucks kept coming after that. Every Tuesday and every Friday, another load rumbled down the dirt road that split his grandmother's land in half, and every load dumped another mountain of broken brown husks behind the old tobacco barn. Workers from the factory leaned against the truck doors and laughed while they watched him unload. Some of them took bets on how many more deliveries it would take before he told them to stop. Nobody at Palmview Coconut Processing had ever seen anybody want their trash before, and certainly not for free, and certainly not this much of it. Malik never asked for a dime. He never complained about the smell, or the flies, or the way the shells cut his palms raw before he learned to wrap them. He just kept showing up at the gate every week, asking the same question to whichever foreman was on shift. "You got more coming?" Nobody could figure out what he wanted with it. The shells weren't good for lumber. They weren't good for feed. The factory had been paying a hauling company to cart them off to the landfill for years, losing money on garbage nobody wanted, and here was a kid asking for more of it like it was gold. What was he building back there behind that barn? Why did he keep asking for more when the piles were already taller than the barn roof? Nobody knew, and Malik wasn't telling. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from today. Before there was a mountain of coconut shells, there was just a boy and his grandmother, and 11 acres of land that had been in the family since before the county even had paved roads. Odessa Reeves had raised Malik in the same clapboard house she was raised in, and she had a habit of picking things up that other people threw away. Bent nails, cracked flower pots, old feed sacks, and turning them into something useful again. She did most of it wearing the same pair of canvas gardening gloves, patched at the fingertips so many times over the years that the patches had patches. When Malik asked her why she bothered fixing gloves that should have been thrown out a decade earlier, she always gave him the same answer. "Nothing on God's earth is truly useless, baby. People just stop looking too soon." He didn't understand it. Not really, not back then. It was just something grandmothers said. But it stuck to him, the way certain sentences do, waiting patiently for the day they'd finally make sense. That day was a long way off, though, because by the time Malik turned 19, the land was in serious trouble. His grandfather had passed 3 years earlier, and the debts he'd quietly carried came out of hiding the way debts always do. Slow, then all at once. Property taxes had gone unpaid for 2 seasons. The bank sent a letter, then another letter, then a man in a gray suit who walked the property line with a clipboard and didn't say much. Odessa's hands, arthritis swollen and shaking now, could barely grip a hoe anymore, let alone the 11 acres that needed working. Malik dropped out of community college after 1 semester because the gas money to get there and the money to keep the lights on at home couldn't both exist at the same time. 2 of his closest friends from high school had already left Driftwood Bend for good, one to a warehouse job up in Jacksonville, the other to the Army, and more than one person told him, straight to his face, that he ought to do the same. "Ain't nothing here for a young man but dirt and debt," his Uncle Curtis told him one Sunday after church. Not unkindly, just tired. "You're smart enough to leave. Do it before this land takes you down with it." Malik didn't leave. He couldn't say exactly why, except that leaving felt like agreeing that his grandmother had spent her whole life protecting something worthless, and some stubborn, quiet part of him refused to believe that. He took whatever work he could find instead. Mowing yards on weekends, hauling scrap for a man 2 roads over, picking up shifts loading trucks at a produce packing house 40 minutes away. None of it paid enough to matter on its own. All of it together barely kept the lights on and the water running. Some nights he sat at the kitchen table with the bank's letters spread out in front of him, doing the same math over and over, hoping it would come out differently if he just added it up one more time. It never did. The number the county wanted was always bigger than the number he had, and the gap between them felt less like a debt and more like a wall with no door in it. He found the coconut factory almost by accident. He'd taken a temporary job hauling scrap for extra cash, and the route ran him past Palmview Coconut Processing 3 times a week, past a back lot where a small mountain of broken shells sat rotting in the Florida sun. He asked one of the yard workers about it, mostly out of idle curiosity. "Man, we pay somebody good money just to haul that mess to the dump," the worker said, shaking his head. "Been doing it for years. Shells pile up faster than we can get rid of them. You want some? Take all you want, save us the trouble. Malik didn't say yes right away. He drove home that evening, turning the offer over and over, the way you turn over a stone looking for something underneath it. He didn't have a plan yet. He just had a feeling, faint and stubborn, that something was being thrown away that shouldn't be. The next morning he asked the plant manager, a broad-shouldered man named Nathaniel Grady, if the offer was real. Take as many as you want, Grady told him, barely looking up from his clipboard. You're doing us a favor, son. Nobody at the plant asked what he wanted them for. Nobody thought to. And Malik didn't explain, mostly because he still didn't fully know himself. Not yet. He just knew that his grandmother had told him, more times than he could count, that people gave up on things too soon, and that the things people threw away weren't always as worthless as they looked. He started reading. At the library, on library computers because the house didn't have reliable internet, he found what he was looking for almost by accident. An old agricultural bulletin about charcoal made from coconut shells instead of wood. It burned hotter, it said. It burned longer. It threw less smoke and less ash than the ordinary charcoal sold in every grocery store in America, the kind made from scrap lumber and sawdust and God knows what else. Restaurants overseas paid a premium for it. Serious grillers sought it out by name, and here it was, an entire mountain of it, sitting free for the taking 12 miles from his front door. It sounded almost too simple, trash into treasure, but Malik had grown up long enough with his grandmother to know that simple wasn't the same thing as easy. His first attempt was a disaster, and it happened almost exactly the way his Uncle Curtis predicted it would. He dug a shallow pit behind the barn, stacked the shells the way he imagined a fire pit should be stacked, and lit it, expecting something like magic. What he got instead was smoke. Thick, choking, endless smoke. And by morning, nothing left but a heap of gray ash. No charcoal, no product. Just ash and the smell of failure clinging to his clothes for 2 days. He tried again with a second pit, dug deeper this time, packed tighter. This time it rained 3 days later before he could finish the burn, and the wet shells turned to a soggy, worthless mush that wouldn't light at all. 2 batches gone, weeks of collecting, wasted. His Uncle Curtis heard about the failed pits before Malik ever mentioned them himself. Word traveled fast in a town that small, and he brought it up at the next family dinner without being asked. Heard you burned up a hole in the ground behind the barn, Curtis said, not cruelly, just plainly, the way people state facts they think are obvious. Boy, them shells are trash for a reason. Odessa didn't defend him out loud that night, and Malik almost wished she had. But later, alone, she told him something instead. Let him think what he wants. Thinking don't cost you nothing. Quitting does. It was around then that he met Otha Freeman. Otha was 71 years old, a retired mill worker who'd spent decades of his life around kilns before arthritis, and a bad hip forced him into a rocking chair on his porch 2 miles down the road. He'd heard about the boy piling shells behind the old Reeves place, and one afternoon he drove over uninvited, climbed slowly out of his truck, and stood at the edge of Malik's second failed pit with his arms crossed. You're doing it like it's a bonfire, Otha said. Charcoal ain't a bonfire. Charcoal's about starving a fire, not feeding it. He didn't offer to build anything for Malik. He didn't offer money, or equipment, or a shortcut of any kind. What he offered was harder and more valuable than any of that. Knowledge, given slowly, in pieces, the way a man gives out something he's spent a lifetime earning. You need air control, Otha told him. A proper kiln, not a hole in the dirt. You need to cook them shells low and slow, starve the oxygen, let it smolder instead of blaze. You do it right, don't hardly no smoke come off it at all. Malik spent the next month building what Otha described, a covered steel drum kiln with a controlled air vent, welded together from a rusted fuel drum he'd bought for almost nothing at a scrapyard in the next county. His third attempt produced actual charcoal, real char, black and firm instead of gray ash. But it burned uneven, crumbling in some spots and barely cooked through in others. His fourth attempt, 3 weeks later, cracked halfway through the burn when the drum overheated, and he lost an entire batch to fire that spread faster than he could smother it, scorching a patch of his grandmother's garden black before he got it under control with a garden hose in pure panic. Odessa found him afterward, sitting in the dirt beside the ruined kiln, hands blistered, face streaked with soot and something close to tears. She didn't scold him. She sat down next to him in the dirt in her good church dress, which she never did for anything, and she took his burned hands into her own crooked, arthritis-swollen ones, the same ones that had worn those patched canvas gloves for 40 years, mending whatever the world had given up on. You know what I do when I plant something and it don't come up right the first year? She asked him. He shook his head. I planted again the next year, same dirt, just wiser about it. She squeezed his hands. Nothing worth having grows right the first time, baby. Not gardens. Not people. It took him 6 more attempts before he got it right. 6 more weeks of trial, of Otha stopping by every few days to watch and correct, never fixing, only pointing. Too much air here, not enough drainage there. Watch your temperature, don't rush the cool down. By the 7th batch, Malik pulled black, dense, ringing charcoal out of that drum. Chunks that clinked together like stone when he knocked them against each other. Exactly the way Otha said good charcoal should sound. He didn't have customers yet. He didn't have a name for it yet. What he had was a single duffel bag full of proof that the thing in his head actually worked. He drove that duffel bag into town and set it on the counter of the first serious barbecue restaurant he could think of, a smokehouse on the edge of the county run by a man named Desmond Cole, who'd been competing on the regional barbecue circuit for 15 years and had opinions about fuel the way other men have opinions about football. Desmond didn't say much at first. He just took a chunk of Malik's charcoal, turned it over in his hand, weighed it, sniffed it, and finally lit a single piece over his stovetop burner just to watch how it caught. "Where'd you get this?" Desmond finally asked. "Made it myself," Malik said. "Coconut shells. From the processing plant outside town." Desmond didn't say much else that day, but 2 days later he called and asked for 50 pounds, and Malik didn't sleep that whole week getting it ready. That first sale didn't fix anything. 50 pounds of charcoal wasn't going to pay off 2 years of back taxes or keep the bank off his grandmother's land. But it did something almost as important. It proved to Malik, in a way that no bulletin or library article ever could, that somebody out there in the world would actually pay for what he was making. Word moved slowly at first, the way it does in small places. One pitmaster telling another, one Facebook post from Desmond's smokehouse showing off the coals under a rack of ribs. A specialty grocer 2 towns over called asking for a sample, then a restaurant supplier out of Jacksonville. Orders started coming in faster than Malik could produce them out of one hand-built steel drum, and he had to build 2 more kilns just to keep pace, working nights after his day job, falling asleep some evenings with soot still under his fingernails. He started keeping a spiral notebook by the kilns, the way Otha had always kept one for his own burns decades earlier. Burn times, weather, how the wind was blowing, which batches came out ringing clean, and which ones came out crumbly. He filled 3 of those notebooks that first year, and every one of them made the next batch a little more predictable than the last. A few of his old classmates, the ones who used to needle him about staying behind in Driftwood Bend instead of moving on like everybody else, started showing up at Desmond's smokehouse just to see the operation for themselves. Some of them asked for jobs. He didn't have work for all of them yet, but he wrote their names down too, in the back of the same notebook, for when he did. His uncle Curtis, who'd told him to leave Driftwood Bend for good, came by one evening to drop something off for Odessa, and stood at the edge of the property staring at the 3 kilns, the stacked pallets of bagged charcoal, the delivery truck idling in the driveway waiting to be loaded. "This what you've been doing back here?" Curtis asked, and for the first time in a long while there wasn't any doubt in his voice, just something closer to surprise. Malik just nodded and kept loading bags onto the pallet. He didn't say anything sharp back. His grandmother had taught him that too, that you don't have to prove people wrong out loud. You just keep working, and eventually the work does the proving for you. Then came the fire. It happened on a Tuesday night in late September, 6 months into production, right as 2 of his biggest orders yet were sitting bagged and ready for pickup the following morning. Nobody ever figured out exactly what caused it, a spark from the 3rd kiln that had been running hotter than it should, maybe, or a stray ember caught by a gust of wind off the coast. Whatever the cause, by the time Malik smelled smoke and ran out into the yard, half of his finished inventory was already burning, and by the time the volunteer fire department made it down the dirt road, there wasn't much left to save. 2 kilns damaged, months of bagged product gone. The orders he'd promised Desmond and the Jacksonville supplier gone with it. He stood in the wreckage the next morning with ash still smoking faintly in the pit where his inventory used to be, and for the first time since he'd started, he let himself believe it might really be over. The bank letters hadn't stopped coming. The land was still one bad season away from being lost for good, and now the one thing he'd built to save it was sitting in a smoking ruin behind the barn. Otha showed up that morning too, without being called, the way he always seemed to know when he was needed. He didn't offer comfort exactly. He just stood next to Malik, looking at the wreckage with him for a long, quiet minute. "Fire teaches you things a good burn never will," Otha finally said. Now you know exactly what a kiln does when it gets away from you. Ain't a man alive who does this work who hasn't lost a batch to fire. Questions not whether you lost it. Questions whether you're building the next one smarter. Malik rebuilt. He redesigned the kilns with better containment this time, spaced them farther apart, added simple fire breaks between them that Otha helped him plan out on a piece of scrap cardboard at the kitchen table. He called Desmond and the Jacksonville supplier himself, before they could call him, and told them the truth, that he'd lost the batch, that he needed 2 more weeks, that he understood if they needed to look elsewhere in the meantime. Neither of them did. Anybody can sell you charcoal when the sun's shining, Desmond told him over the phone. I want to know who shows up honest when it's not. That's worth more to me than 2 weeks. The 2 weeks became a turning point instead of a collapse. When the new batches finally came out of the rebuilt kilns, they were more consistent than anything Malik had produced before. Tighter burn times, cleaner smoke, a uniform density, Otha said most commercial charcoal makers spent years chasing. Desmond featured it on his restaurant's page as the secret behind his competition briskets. The Jacksonville supplier increased their order. A regional outdoor cooking magazine ran a short feature on a young charcoal maker in North Florida, turning coconut waste into a premium grilling product. And after that, the orders stopped trickling in and started arriving in a steady current. Some by phone, some through a simple order page one of his old classmates built for him for free, shipping bags as far as Georgia and the Carolinas to backyard grillers who'd read about him online. Palmview Coconut Processing noticed too. Nathaniel Grady, the same plant manager who'd once handed off his trash without a second thought, drove out to the Reeves property himself to see what had become of it. He stood at the edge of the yard, looking at 3 well-tended kilns, stacked pallets ready for shipping, and a young man moving through the whole operation with the calm, practiced motion of somebody who'd earned every bit of what he was looking at. We've been paying to haul this stuff to the landfill for 15 years, Grady said, shaking his head slowly. And you turned it into this. What came next wasn't charity, and Malik never asked for any. Grady offered him something better, a standing supply agreement, guaranteed shells delivered straight to the property instead of hauled off to rot, a partnership between the plant and the little charcoal operation that had started as a joke on the loading dock. The forklift driver who'd made that first bet about the rainy season ended up being one of the men who loaded Malik's trucks now, and neither of them ever brought the old bet back up. They didn't need to. By the following spring, the back taxes were paid in full. The bank letters stopped coming. Malik hired his first 2 employees, one of them the same friend who'd left for the warehouse job in Jacksonville, glad for a reason to come home. The operation had a name now, stitched onto the canvas of every bag that left the property. Driftwood Bend Charcoal, still hand-built, still run out of the same 11 acres his grandmother had spent her whole life refusing to let go of. Odessa was slower now, her hands more crooked than ever, but she still came out to the yard some mornings to watch the smoke curl thin and clean from the kilns. She still wore the same gardening gloves she'd worn for as long as Malik could remember, patched so many times they were more thread than fabric, and she kept them hanging on a nail by the back door even after her hands got too stiff to use them for much of anything. One evening, not long after the debts were finally cleared, Malik found her out there at dusk, just looking at the kilns, the way she used to look at a garden right before harvest. You remember what I told you back when you were small? She asked him. About nothing being truly useless? I remember, he said. You believed me that day? He thought about it honestly before he answered. No, ma'am, not really. Not until I saw it for myself. She laughed, a small, tired, satisfied sound. That's how it goes with the true things, baby. You don't believe them till you've lived them. She reached over and took his hand, not to shake it, not to congratulate him, just to hold it the way she used to when he was a boy small enough to need holding. And Malik understood, standing there in the smoke and the fading light, that none of this had ever really been about charcoal at all. It was about a woman who never stopped looking twice at things other people threw away, and a boy who finally learned to look the same way. The mountain of shells behind the barn was smaller now, turned over faster than the trucks could pile it back up. But it never fully disappeared, and Malik never wanted it to. Every load that came down that dirt road was a reminder of where all of it had started, with a bet, a laugh, and a 19-year-old boy who kept showing up anyway. If this story reminded you that opportunity often hides inside what others ignore, subscribe for more stories like this. Leave a comment telling us about a time you turned a setback into an opportunity, and tell us where you're watching from.